I was talking to Pastor Isabella last night, and I was telling her, I remember March 2020. March 2020, we had breakfast together. We had a full worship team, and we were singing together, and we were next to each other. We were early enough in the pandemic that we had a little extra hand sanitizer, and we were fist bumping and elbow bumping instead of hugging and shaking hands even back then. But I remember that, and so it's a little crazy for me. As Pastor Isabella got emotional, it's just so wonderful to see faces of people, and even masked faces of people are better than no faces at all, and it really helps me in speaking to actually be able to see you. So thank you so much for being here. So my message today is really about grace and about fairness. Grace is a love and mercy given to us by God because God desires us to have it, not necessarily because of anything we have done to earn it. And the thing about grace is not fair. It's not fair, and that is a really good thing, but it's a very difficult thing for most of us to handle because fairness is something that's kind of built into the human DNA. So in our family, we've been doing a weekly family night where we rotate somebody being in charge of maybe having dinner, some kind of activity, might be a movie, it might be a game. And Kaylin actually brought forward this game called Would You Rather? And I don't know if any of you have ever played that. There's a whole bunch of questions on the internet, right? Would you rather never eat cake again or never eat ice cream again? Might be an example, right? And it's meant to kind of provoke thought, open up discussion, and hopefully maybe some laughter as well. One of my favorites, would you rather sing everything you say or dance every time you hear music? If you're Mark Canoli, you might just embrace that, right? You might just go, bring it on, I'll do both of those. But for most of us, we have pictures in our head like, oh, okay, what does that job interview look like? What does that first date look like? What does that, time that I'm in an elevator with other people look like, right? And so it might be a little bit of a harder decision. Maybe an easier decision would be, would you rather have $10,000 or $25,000? I'm just going to give it to you. What do you say? 25? Everybody 25? Okay, 100% of the people are saying 25. And, that makes sense, right? It's more money. Even if you don't need it today, you can always share it with a charity or other people. We can give some to the orphanage, so 25,000 would be awesome. If I ask the question differently, though, would you rather receive $10,000 knowing your peers will receive $5,000, or receive $25,000 knowing your peers will receive $50,000? How does that hit you? Unfair, somebody said, right? It shouldn't be different, right? I'm offering you $10,000 or $25,000, but the comparison here is, why is somebody else getting more? That doesn't seem fair. Would I rather have less money but know that I'm getting more than other people? I don't know what your answer is, but in the psychological experiments that were done, about 50% of people would choose less money knowing they would get more. And I can almost guarantee you that the people who picked the $10,000 are not as happy as they were in picking the $25,000 before with no comparison. And the people who picked the $25,000 are also not quite so happy. Why is that? Why is it that comparison, that feeling of fairness is so important to us? It's you can add zeros, you can take zeros away, you could do $1 or $5, it doesn't matter. The pattern of behavior is very consistent. And so it made me actually think about the parable of the workers in the vineyard. That shows how Pastor Isabel is wearing off on me, that I jumped to scripture when I was listening to this podcast, because on the surface, things don't seem to make sense. But, God's approach with his grace is different than our human approach of fairness. So I'm going to read from Matthew 21 through 16 from the Message, and then we can talk a little bit more about fairness, comparison, and grace. God's kingdom is like an estate manager who went out early in the morning to hire workers in his vineyard. They agreed on a wage of $1 a day and went to work. Excuse me. Later, about 9 o'clock, the manager saw some other men hanging out around town, square unemployed, and he told them, go to work in the vineyard, and he would pay them a fair wage. They went. He did the same thing at noon and again at 3 o'clock. At 5 o'clock, he went back and found still others standing around. He said, why are you standing around all day doing nothing? They said, because no one hired us. He told them, go to work in my vineyard. When the day's work was over, the owner of the vineyard instructed his foreman, call the workers in and pay them their wages. Start with the last hired and then go on to the first. Those hired at 5 o'clock came up and were each given $1. When those who were hired first saw that, they assumed they would get far more, but they got the same, each one of them $1. Taking the $1, they groused angrily to the manager, these last workers put in only 1 easy hour, and you made them equal to us, who slaved all day in the scorching sun. He replied to the one speaking for the rest, friend, I haven't been unfair. We agreed on the wage of $1, didn't we? So take it and go. I decided to give the one who came last the same as you. Can't I do what I want with my own money? Are you going to get stingy because I'm generous? Here it is again, the great reversal. Many of the first ending up last, and the last first. So I don't know about you, but when I remember as a kid hearing this parable and going like, that's not fair. Those people have been working all day, like, wow, I understand why they're mad. I don't think that they're stingy. So what's that all about, right? I think that this parable of the vineyard actually strikes a chord in most, if not all of us, because we live in a world where we believe in fairness. And the thought of people 12 hours of hard work getting the same thing as somebody who came in at the end of the day just doesn't make any sense. I would imagine most of us can relate to the person who is speaking up on behalf of the workers that have been there all day going, wait a minute, right? Even though they were happy to sign up for $1 a day, just like maybe you were happy to sign up for the 25,000, right? All of a sudden, wait, comparatively, this value doesn't work for me. Makes me angry, makes me feel unappreciated. It feels unfair. I would also venture to say that if you were the person hired at 5 o'clock, you might feel a little guilty. You might be looking at that going, I got this $1, but I don't know, like it doesn't feel fair to me either, right? Maybe I should give some of it to the people who've worked here longer. I mean, we have that intrinsic thing in us, right? And so if you think about fairness, there's a positive part of fairness, and there's a not so good part about this comparison fairness, right? So I remember Pastor Dave, who was a pastor at Fremont Community Church for a while, would often tell a story about growing up in a Korean culture where his mother would give the choicest and the biggest portions to his father and his brother. And there were 4 boys. I'm sure they had hearty appetites. And it was a little disconcerting to be one of the younger 3 boys and look and see your older brother getting these big portions. But you know what he also told us? His brother was like, this isn't fair. And he would sneak them food, right? He would like pass along when his parents weren't looking and give them food. Why? Because he didn't think he was fair. It's kind of like the people at the end of the day. He wanted to make it more equal. I remember Caitlin having a friend, Samantha, who came over, and she had a little sister, and I offered her like a cookie, and she said, "Can I have one for my little sister too?" Right? She wanted, even though she wasn't there, right? She wanted to take it home to her because she wanted to make it fair. In fact, even monkeys want to make it fair. So in the same podcast I was listening to that was talking about the comparison of the money, there was an overview of some monkeys and a whole bunch of examples of how they also want things to be fair. So I'll give you one. In the monkey world, there's sort of like a range of food, right? So you might have something kind of like dog kibble that's, on one end of the spectrum, not very good. And at the top end of the spectrum, you have something like sweet and juicy, like an orange. And maybe in the middle are peanuts, right? So what they found was if they had two monkeys together and they gave one an orange and they gave one some peanuts, often, maybe not always, but quite often, they would figure out how to make it fair. The monkey with the orange would maybe split it in half and give that to the one that had peanuts. And then the one with the peanuts would give half his peanuts to the other monkey, right? So this just tells you how deep in our DNA this comparison fairness is. And these are examples of good comparison, noticing people in need, wanting to do the right thing for other people. And that is a wonderful thing, right? But the other side of the coin is not so pretty. When we compare ourselves to other people and we think we're coming up short, when we look around and we say, oh, how come that person has that and I don't? Why is God blessing that person in a different way than he's blessing me? So, this gift includes our salvation. It also includes the blessings that we have. But I think we need to understand God's approach really doesn't make sense to us. And that is an obstacle that we have to figure out how to overcome. How to receive grace from God when he wants to give it to us and we don't feel worthy, but also how to appreciate when God is blessing other people, when he is allowing them things that maybe we think we should have for ourselves. So I think it feels like I went off topic, right, as I'm talking about monkeys, but let's go back to the parable here. So, this is Peter, right? And I want to kind of set context of what was happening, what caused Jesus to tell this parable in the first place, right? So Jesus, if you remember, he's talking to a rich man. The rich man had come and, he wanted to know how to be perfect, how to get to heaven. And Jesus had said, follow the law, follow the Mosaic law. And he said, maybe a bit arrogantly, yeah, I already do that. I do all that stuff, right? Which probably, if he was human like we all are, probably wasn't as perfect as maybe he was purporting, but that's what he said. And so he said, well, what else? And so Jesus said, give up everything. Give up your money, leave your family, come follow me. And the rich man could not bring himself to do that. And so Peter is overhearing that. And you have to love Peter because he just says things that we might be thinking, but we would not say, right? He just blurts out the stuff that we're too embarrassed to even say, right? And so he's like going, well, Jesus, I already dropped my net when you came. I already followed you. I already gave up my livelihood. I've been with you. We've been with you. We're like the first. We're like your inner circle. So what do we get? Right? Because if you're offering that to this person further down in the ministry, chose not to follow you, then what's in it for me, right? And then I have to ask myself, did Peter, was he thinking about that when he dropped his fishing nets and he followed Jesus? Was he thinking about that last week? Probably not, right? The relationship with Jesus, being with him, being inspired by him, being loved by him, learning from him, those were his gifts until he saw something else, right? So then he says, what then will we have? So this is what leads up to Jesus maybe chastising Peter a little bit to tell the parable. So one interesting thing about this parable, it's one of the few in the Bible that there's not actually an explanation that Jesus gives later. So normally he'll tell the parable, figure out, we're not really smart enough to kind of figure it out, and so he will explain. But in this case, he doesn't do that. I want to remind you about what was said at the end. He replied to the one speaking for the rest, "Friend, I haven't been unfair. We agreed on a wage of $1, didn't we? So take it and go. I decided to give the one who came last the same as you. Can't I do what I want with my own money? Are you going to get stingy because I'm generous?" I don't know about you. I mean, I don't feel like they were stingy, right? But for sure the comparison is there. But in this parable, there's an assumption. Most people, most scholars have an assumption that the owner here is representing God and that we are the workers and the dollar is essentially our salvation. And he's basically saying, it doesn't matter if you came to know me when you were 5 years old and you've been in full-time missionary work your entire life, sacrificing everything, or if you're on your deathbed and you have ignored me your life, or you haven't been aware of me, you haven't reached out to me, but now you're there and you want me, you want that relationship, you want salvation. Doesn't matter. Either way, I'm giving you this gift. So when you think about it in that term, it feels a lot better than the $1 a day, at least to me. It's like, okay, I can be a big enough person to want salvation for everybody, to want other people to live in that. But I think, we even do this day to day, not even about salvation, right? We compare ourselves to other people. Maybe you look at people like Charles and Pastor Isabella and go, wow, look at all the ministry that they're doing. What are they earning by doing that, right? Or, maybe you go, wow, that person's been a really bad person their entire life, and is it really fair that they get to go to heaven? I mean, you might be asking those questions. So you might go, God, why are you blessing that person? I've been trying to have a child for years, and they just had a oopsie baby. That isn't fair. God, how come my coworker got promoted and I'm the person that's doing all the work and everybody except the boss seems to know that? How come that person's able to buy a house and I'm living in a small apartment with my family? I've been doing all this stuff. You're just sitting there, and frankly, it makes you unhappy. And we can't understand why God blesses people in certain ways, or we also don't know what's going on behind the surface, right? That person that has the incredible house may be the loneliest person in the world, and you in your apartment with your loving family might be so blessed that you just don't even know it. The person with the prom queen teenager that you go, oh my gosh, why is my child not the same as this child, might be cutting herself in pain, right? You don't know people's stories. You don't know what's going on inside of them in this Facebook world that we have, that everything is perfect, that everyone else, and we know our own faults and our own shame, is just a really bad place to be. So Pastor Isabella actually sent me a commentary about the parable that I thought was interesting and something I never thought about before. And in this particular commentary, they were talking about the people who It wasn't until 5 o'clock that they were chosen to come work in the field. So they'd been there all day. People been coming, not just this particular vineyard, probably, I picture Home Depot, right? The workers there and, people coming by. And who gets picked in the morning? The young, the strong, the fast, the smart, right? Like, who do you want in your vineyard? The prime people. Makes me think about, getting picked for like kickball. I was never, ever in even the top 50% of people picked for kickball, right? And I was always hoping and praying that I wouldn't be the last person picked. Like, maybe I'd be, somewhere before that, right? And if you're lucky, one of your friends picks you, even though they know you're not going to help their team, right? So I picture, you're standing there, you're wanting to work, you're wanting to earn a wage, and nobody's picking you. Who is that? It's the elderly. It's the disabled. It's the ill. It could be those shunned by society. Maybe somebody whose family has done something shameful, criminal activity, maybe a race that isn't embraced in that particular society. Those are the people who were there at 5 o'clock. And so if you think about it that way, that means people who otherwise, maybe they just didn't get a chance. They would have been willing to work the full 12 hours, but nobody chose them. Jesus is inclusive. He is involving everybody, regardless of any status, regardless of anything, right? And so I thought that was just a really cool way of looking at it that I had never thought about before. So, life is not fair, and that's hard to understand, and we understand now this is like sort of inside of us. But grace isn't fair, and that's just amazing. And we need to really focus on God's generosity because he has the big picture, and not so much focus on the things that we think we're not getting when we compare ourselves to others. So I love this quote by Francis Chan. He says, "Salvation is all about the grace of God. There's absolutely nothing you can do to save yourself or to earn God's favor." I'm just going to read this from a commentary because I love the way this person put it. He said, "Jesus turns our ambitions topsy-turvy. He strips away the notion that we earn our way into heaven, and he strips away the notion that our heavenly rewards are proportionate to our Christian service." Ooh, something to think about there, right? He strips away the notion that we're competing with other Christian saints for heavenly rewards. He leaves us wholly dependent on the generosity of a merciful God who is eager to surprise us with undeserved blessings and to lavish on us joys that we would never have conceived. If you ever think about like just getting a just because present, like it's not your birthday, it's not Christmas, it's not Valentine's Day, whatever, and somebody goes, "I was just thinking of you. Let me just give you this." It doesn't even matter how big or small the gift is, it just makes you feel special. I think that's what this person is talking about in talking about grace. So if all this is true, then why do we serve? Why bother? We can just accept Jesus, as our Savior, and that's all good, right? And like to me, the reason I serve is because it's part of my relationship with Jesus. It's not because I want to earn something from it. It's just like Peter dropping his nets and going with Jesus. It's because he wants to, right? We want to give back. We want to have that relationship. And so, comparing ministries, comparing yourself to other people and what they're doing, you just need to be doing what God is calling you to do, what makes you feel good inside, what is like your sweet spot that you're going, yeah. And if you're in a ministry and that isn't your calling, you're probably dwelling more in this comparison place than if you're doing something that gives you joy. So find the things that God has for you that gives you joy. So there's a comparison parable that's often goes along with the vineyard, and that is the parable of the prodigal son. So I think most people know that parable where the son asks for half his inheritance. He goes and runs off, makes horrible decisions, squanders everything, basically is crawling back home, hoping that his father will maybe give him a servant's type of role. He has very low expectations. Meantime, the older brother has been there partnering with his father, working with his father, not, behaving, doing all the right things. And when the younger son comes home, instead of giving him scraps, giving him a servant thing, he's like, oh my gosh, my son was lost and now he's found, and he embraces him. He gives a party. He, gives him a ring. And I think, for me, that was just a way easier parable to digest than this vineyard one. Why is that? I think it's because there's a relationship there. If you're a child or you're a parent, you can understand a relationship where you go, you know what? I know this person's heart. This is my son. I love him. I'm going to just, give him everything because I know that he learned from this experience. But if you're the older brother, and I remember in grammar school, we're going what older brother? He's so stingy, whatever. But if you really put yourself in his shoes and you go, wait a minute, I've been here. I've been doing all this stuff and you're giving him more than me, actually, right? I wanted a goat to hang out with my friends and you said no, and now you're killing the fatted calf? What's that about? It doesn't feel fair, right? But for us, because of the relationship, we can better sort of digest and go, I understand why the father would treat his son that way. And I understand that, the older brother might not be super happy, but he kind of needs to get over that, right? So, think about, are we putting those judgments on people, right? So, the reality is we do not earn our salvation. Works are nothing that are going to get us something. Nothing that we can do is going to make us more worthy in God's eyes. And again, that is a gift because we are all flawed. So I always like to get to the practical, right? Here's a bunch of theories. So what do I do with this? So we're living in a world where we're constantly comparing ourselves to others. Other people are comparing themselves to us. Social media is comparing everybody to everybody. And we have to figure out, we have something inside of us that is so integral that monkeys have it in them, right? Primates have this in their being. And so what that means is we can't just pretend that this fairness, that this comparison thing isn't there, right? We have to do something to mitigate that in our lives. So I was thinking about an analogy, and to me, if you think about somebody who has an addiction problem, maybe an alcoholic, they never lose that need for alcohol. It doesn't go away just because they're a recovering alcoholic, right? It's there, it's present. Sometimes it's more present and more compelling than other times. But when they go to Alcoholics Anonymous or whatever situation that they choose that is going to help them get past this addiction, they replace things in their life, they change their perspective, they do things differently than they did before they stopped drinking. So, an example, they probably don't have bottles of alcohol in their home where they can just walk over, grab something and drink it. They make it harder to do that, right? They probably don't go hang out in bars with people. They probably have friends that they bonded with over drinking and that get drunk that they have to go, you know what, that isn't healthy for me. I'm not going to do that. When they're by themselves, they probably, when they feel that urge, they have something that they can go to. It might be, I'm running. I'm getting out of the house. I'm going for a run or a walk, whatever it is, a bicycle ride. It might be, I need to call my sponsor. I need to call my friend. I need to have them talk me through this, right? It might be, I need to fall on my knees and just ask God for strength because I don't have it and I know He can give it to me. But whatever those coping mechanisms are, and this is maybe a little more extreme than the spirit of comparison, but I believe it's really important. We need to find those coping mechanisms for ourselves that stop us from going to those bad places. I love this quote from Theodore Roosevelt. He says, "Comparison is the thief of joy." And that, I'm like, amen, Teddy Roosevelt. I never thought I would say that, right? But anyway, I just think that is so true. So what do I do? First thing you want to do is accept God's gift of grace and salvation, even if you're not feeling worthy, because that isn't fair and isn't that great. I may not deserve it, but I accept it, and that will make God happy. We also have to rejoice in other people receiving that gift. And when we're comparing, we have to reframe. So if I'm comparing my ministry to somebody else's ministry and finding them, short, right? I have to reframe. I have to remind myself, why am I doing this ministry? It's giving me joy. It's giving God joy. It's helping other people. That's important to me. I don't need to care about what this person over here is doing. In the spirit of comparison, again, you need to reframe. What do I really know about this person, right? The person in the big house that's lonely, the person with a perfect child who's dealing with issues, the person who shows up every day looking happy at work, and then you find out terrible things. I'm a human resource person, and so sometimes I learn things about people that other people don't know. So I know about the man who is leaving at 5 o'clock every day, and people talk about him behind his back, that he has a mother with Alzheimer's that he's single-handedly taking care of when he goes home every night. I know about the person who is missing some work, whose daughter is dealing with severe anorexia and might die unless they can make a change there. I know about those things, but other people don't. Remind yourself you don't know everything that's going on, and let that stuff go. The last thing, and I feel like a broken record about gratefulness, but to me, gratefulness is just such an amazing thing. If you can really focus on what you have during this time of COVID, during regular day-to-day life, it just is an amazing gift to yourself. I was telling some of the people here that I was watching a video that's gone viral this morning of a little girl. She's probably about 8, maybe, and her parents are telling her that after almost over a year, she gets to go back to school. She's crying. She's jumping up and down. She is so excited to go back to school. And think about, would she have been that excited a year ago? No, right? So that gratefulness, though, just really hit me this morning when I was looking at it like, oh my gosh, I always kind of liked, I was a school person, not a kickball person, so I always liked going back to school in the fall at least, but I don't think I ever got that excited, right? So when things are taken away, it gives you a different perspective of gratefulness, of really understanding, wow, I really do have a gift that's been given to me. All right, so this is my last slide. So this is Romans 6:14. I love this picture. For sin shall not have dominion over you. You are not under the law, but you are under grace. So every time Pastor Isabella asks me to give a message, it seems like I listen to songs differently, at least praise songs differently than when I'm not in that mindset. And so I was listening to a song, and the words just really hit me in this song. They say, some may call it foolish and impossible, but for every heart it rescues, it's a miracle. It's nothing less than scandalous. I love that word. This love that took your place, just call it what it is. Call it grace.